Imagine for a second trying to completely decode the mindset of a formidable adversary, but you can't even set foot in their country. Well, that's exactly the puzzle we're digging into today. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unravel a fascinating cultural mystery from 1944 that honestly just completely baffled the Western world.
And it all really boils down to this one massive paradox. How on earth can a society revere the fragile, delicate beauty of chrysanthemums as this incredibly high art form, and yet, at the exact same time, fight with unimaginable, ruthless ferocity? It just seems impossible, right? Two absolute polar extremes coexisting perfectly in a single culture. To figure this out, we're looking at anthropologist Ruth Benedict's legendary 1946 study, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. During World War II, the U.S. government actually tasked her with analyzing this enigmatic enemy entirely at a distance. Because she couldn't visit Japan, she had to rely on interviews, literature, and films to map out what turned out to be a deeply intricate web of cultural rules.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the paradox of the chrysanthemum and the sword. Second, why soldiers fight. Third, the Japanese warrior code. Fourth, two great internal conflicts. And finally, shame versus guilt.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the paradox of the chrysanthemum and the sword. So Western observers at the time were just completely thrown off. On one hand, they saw people who were exceptionally polite, highly adaptable, and deeply appreciative of delicate aesthetics. That's the chrysanthemum. But then, on the flip side, they were incredibly rigid, intensely militaristic, and fiercely aggressive if provoked. That's the sword. In Western eyes, a society is usually one or the other. But in Japan, both of these traits were entirely authentic and just woven right into their cultural DNA.
Moving on to part two. Why exactly do these soldiers fight? Okay, to understand their actions on the battlefield, you have to understand chu. This is the foundational concept. It's not just normal patriotism, it's this supreme, absolutely limitless loyalty and obligation owed directly to the emperor. It was a literal spiritual force. Chu is what drove soldiers to rely on flesh against steel. I mean, it's the exact reason pilots would willingly fly their planes into battleships. To them, spiritual loyalty to the emperor was vastly superior to any physical or material limitation.
And because of that intense loyalty, we get this stark reality. Surrender was a total disgrace. It just wasn't an option. In a Western army, if you fight bravely but get cornered, you can surrender and keep your honor, right? Not in the Japanese military of that era. Honor meant fighting to the absolute death. If you became a prisoner of war, your life as a Japanese citizen was effectively over. You were dead to your society, and being erased like that actually stripped away all your previous moral rules.
But here's where it gets really wild. The flip side of Chu. Captured Japanese soldiers actually told the Americans, look, we will fight to the bitter end with bamboo spears if ordered, but the second the emperor commands peace, we will lay down our weapons. And incredibly, that is exactly what happened. The moment the emperor broadcast the surrender, a nation fighting with unbelievable ferocity instantly and peacefully cooperated. They were still fulfilling Chu, they just pivoted in a totally new direction.
That brings us to part three, the Japanese warrior code itself.
Think of this next concept like a map of the Japanese soul. On one side, you've got gimu. These are limitless, infinite obligations you can literally never fully repay, like chu to the emperor or ko to your parents. On the other side, you have giri. These are very specific, almost mathematical repayments of debts to the world, to your lords, and to your own honor. And folks, people in this culture were navigating the balance between these two columns every single day of their lives.
Let's zoom in on giri for a second, because it is intense. There's actually a Japanese proverb that says giri is the hardest burden to bear. These are involuntary duties you just have to perform to avoid public shame. It means showing extreme stoicism, like literally not crying out when you're in pain. But it also means you absolutely must protect your name from the dirt of an insult. Clearing an insult through revenge was seen kind of like taking a morning bath to wash away a physical stain. You just aren't clean until the scales are balanced.
Part four, two great internal conflicts.
So, Japanese life is essentially divided into these competing circles of duty. And what's fascinating is that their traditional stories don't really do the whole good versus evil thing like Western stories do. Instead, they focus on the tragedy of what happens when these equally valid circles violently collide. Like, what do you do when your circle of jiri demands you avenge your master, but your circle of chu demands you obey the state's laws against violence?
To really ground this, let's look at the most famous historical tragedy in Japan, the 47 Ronin.
Back in 1703, Lord Asano is forced to commit ritual suicide after an altercation. His 47 loyal samurai instantly become ronin, meaning masterless. Now, to throw off any suspicion, they wait for months. They feign drunken disgrace, totally ruining their reputations. And then, bam, they strike, killing the man who insulted their lord. But wait, now they've broken the shogun's absolute law.
This is the ultimate clash. The Ronin had a strict jiri duty to avenge their lord, no matter what it cost them. But they also had a chu duty to obey the shogun's law against unsanctioned revenge. So how do you resolve an impossible situation? Simple, but tragic. They satisfied jiri by successfully taking their revenge. And then they satisfied chu by peacefully committing suicide at the state's command. They balanced the circles perfectly, but they paid the ultimate price to do it.
Which brings us to our final revelation. Part 5, Shame versus Guilt.
This right here is the absolute core of Benedict's findings. Western society operates as a guilt culture. Guilt is internal, right? It's a personal conviction of sin. You can feel guilty even if literally no one else in the world knows what you did, and you relieve that feeling through confession. Japan, however, is a shame culture. Shame is totally external. It relies entirely on public judgment and the presence of what they call the observing self.
Just think about this cultural contrast for a second. In the West, being hyper-obsessed with what others think of you is usually seen as a weakness. But in Japan, a man who knows what shame is considered a virtuous, honorable man. Shame isn't a flaw there, it's the root of all good behavior. It is the ultimate social glue that keeps everyone acting correctly within their specific circles of duty. But let's be honest, living under that heavy microscope of shame, or haji, is absolutely exhausting. So Japanese masters actually train to overcome it. They strive to eliminate that self-censoring, observing self altogether. They want to achieve a state called muga, which roughly translates to living as if dead. Now, to us, acting without a conscience sounds like a psychopath. But to the Japanese, muga means acting purely, freely, and perfectly without the hesitation of shame. It's the ultimate spiritual liberation.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Benedict likened this whole Japanese cultural framework to a meticulously pruned, potted chrysanthemum. Absolutely beautiful, but intensely restricted by wire constraints. When you transplant a culture so deeply bound by these rigid codes of duty and shame into the free, open soil of the modern era, how do they adapt? Will they grow wild, or will they find a totally new way to cultivate their unique spirit? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.